You know, I have been incredibly privileged to have spent my life living in Wales and delving into aspects of its history. And how lucky am I today to be here at Dynevor Park on the outskirts of Llandeilo, looking down across this gloriously beautiful Tawy Valley. There's a fantastic concentration of history here, from prehistoric burial grounds, Roman roads and forts, castles of the Welsh princes, and then a landscape that's full of the most glorious gardens. This truly is a magnificent place in terms of beauty and history. Of course, to do justice to this amazing landscape would require a complete series of films far beyond our capabilities. So today we're just focusing on one small aspect, but an important aspect of our folklore, history and culture. Well, there's a backstory to our film today, which started earlier this year when I met a former colleague of mine for a cup of coffee, and we had the inevitable conversation about whatever happened to X, Y and Z, and do you remember this event or that event. But it was when I asked him, what are you doing now, that opened up a whole new realm of history to me, because he started to explain about a project that he was closely involved in. And that's what's brought me here to this delightful apple orchard just alongside the busy A40 road. You know, he spoke with such enthusiasm about the work that he and other volunteers are doing in preserving and regenerating aspects of the history of some of the long forgotten traditional apples of Wales. So Philip, what's so important about these apples?
These are a Bardsey apple. This is a very rare apple because it was one tree left on Bardsey Island, and somebody took the initiative by cloning it or grafting it to make more varieties, and now it's been sold all over Wales and England. So it's a really nice multi-purpose apple. You can eat it, you can cook with it, and it makes nice juice as well. So it's a very rare variety. There's no other DNA match to it anywhere else in the British Isles, so we think it's unique so far.
So how did you become involved with apples and orchards?
Well, I used to climb trees as a lad, as most kids do, you know, and it was a birthday treat. All my friends used to go and climb trees and pick the apples on my birthday. And so I suppose it's just sort of in my DNA a little bit as well. And then I've been organising an apple day at Cwmdu for 22 years now. 22 years, it's coming up in mid-October. And then Paul Davis, who's been selling apple trees in this area for about 40 years, suggested we could start doing an inventory of where the orchards were in the Tawy Valley. And then I picked up on various work that other people had done as well. And then the orchard came along and I retired, and I said, well, I'll volunteer to help look after the orchard. It was only a young orchard, it was only 3 years old at the time. It's now 10, and it's yielding nearly 2 tons of apples each year and increasing each year. So, and I'm just going from strength to strength, really. That's brilliant,
Philip. How many volunteers do you have?
Well, it varies. On cold days and wet days, it's down to about 4 or 5. But today, I think we've got about a dozen here today, so it can vary an awful lot. It depends what there is to do.
So, you have the apple, and I can understand you'll eat an apple.
Yeah.
What are the other byproducts from an apple?
Well, there's only so many you can eat, aren't there? And this is what people tell us for their orchards. They said, I've eaten it until I'm blue in the face with apples. So I said, well, bring them along here. And we juice them and make them into, they can either take away fresh juice, or they can take away, we pasteurise it, or they can hire the equipment, and so they can pasteurise the juice, and that will keep them for probably a couple of years safely. We only got a best before date of 9 months on it, because that's the only testing we've had, but it will keep longer. And we also got a little cider club going, and we make cider. So people can either hire the equipment and do that themselves at home, or they can come in here and use equipment here, or we'll do it on a contract basis, which is what this is for.
That's fantastic.
And then they can sell it and give it to their friends for Christmas and do whatever.
Brilliant.
A lot of people freeze apples. They peel it, cut it into slices and then freeze it as well. But we haven't started doing that yet.
I didn't know you could do that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a way of preserving, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Hey, well, all power to your elbow.
Yeah, no, good.
This was an area of study that was completely new to me. I had no idea about the history of apple growing in Wales. Then I had the good fortune to be introduced to this book, The Apples of Wales, by Carwyn Graves. Now, it may be a small book, but it's absolutely jam-packed with information about apple growing and orchards in this lovely land of ours. We've been very fortunate. It's a wonderful little bit of a serendipity, because filming here today has happened to coincide with their Apple Day. And there's so much going on here. But Philip mentioned a particular person, Paul Davis, and he is very much an expert on the history of apples and the whole aspect of how and where and when apples came from. So I'm going to have a quick word with him.
Varieties. Yeah, the normal ones you'd see being offered.
So these are all the ones you've grown?
Yeah, these 3 bags are from my cider apple trees at home.
Oh, right.
I thought, right, let's see if we can ID them.
How have you been involved with apples and orchards?
About 30 years or so, purely by accident, really. And at one time, every village had its own apple, because there wasn't the kind of contact that we've got now. And an apple grew from a seedling, and it was good, and people liked it, and they cultivated it. And once you've got more than one example, then it no longer becomes a seedling. No longer a seedling, it becomes a cultivar. Apples are so good at how would you call it? Reproducing, really. They're variable. All these are one species. All those 6,500 global varieties are all one species. It's amazing how
Brilliant. Look, so where did the apple come from? It obviously wasn't indigenous to Wales.
It crept in as from the Caucasus, Western China, the Caucasus, that kind of area, and that's still the birthplace of apples. And they crept in along the Silk Road. At least 20 varieties that the Romans brought to this country, and the Romans occupied this area. So it's possible that there's some of the varieties here. But when the Romans left, we don't know what happened. There was a certain amount of cultivation in Wales for sure. But I think most of the varieties that we had have gone. There's a possibility the world still has a variety called Decis or Decis, whatever you want to call it. It could still be Roman, or as near as we get to a Roman variety. Now, prior to the Romans, we had crab apples, and they came over with Neolithic man from the continent.
And weren't they significant in Celtic folklore and druidical?
That's for a Welsh historian rather than me. I'm not Welsh, but it could well be that they would have been about. I think they were used by the Neolithic peoples like we would use humbugs or mints and things. They're very high in vitamin C, and they used to be flash dried in front of the fires, and then they put them they didn't have pockets, but they put them in the pouches, take them with them and eat them because we were all sort of vitamin C, like guinea pigs. It would have been very important there.
I've also been noticing you when you were slicing the apples.
Yeah.
It's almost like wine tasting.
The tasting tends to be the last thing. You do start with the outside and you work in. There's about must be 24 different characters we look at, but that never gets you to the right answer anyway. So much of it's done on experience and guesswork to some extent, and you can guess for a while, and then you have to start making a decision. And sometimes you can't make a final decision. You have to say to somebody, "It's a fairly good chance it's this, but it could be something else. And because nowadays we've got the DNA technology, we can send them the samples of the leaves away, and we'll get a really positive answer, an absolute positive answer.
Fantastic.
And very cheaply, really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul.
Okay,
That
no
was
problem.
just terrific. Well, this is one of the Bardsey varieties that Philip was talking about, and I must say it's absolutely delicious. You know, when I was a kid in junior school, I remember one of the older boys telling me that if I ate the core of an apple, the pips would grow in my stomach and then a tree would grow out of my throat. And it was part of the tales that existed then, you know, that eating carrots would give you better eyesight and that you fed a cold and starved a fever. This everyday fruit that we take almost for granted has a long history of mythology and folklore. I've always been interested in that term, the apple of your eye. Well, there's a school of thought which says that the early doctors, the early medical people, saw that the centre of the eye was absolutely solid, and when they looked at it, they saw that it looked like an apple, hence the term apple of your eye. And also, the Latin word for a young boy was pupos. And likewise, for a young girl was pupae. And that's where we get the derivative of an early form of insect. And so, a pupil, or pupos rather, being quite small, when you go into school at a small age, you become a pupil. And so then when you look into somebody's eye, what do you see? But a reflection of yourself, but a much, much smaller, tinier reflection. Hence the term pupil, if you want to believe that. Most of us are familiar with the role as the apple as being the forbidden fruit in the book of Genesis in the Bible. But there are many other references as well. Greek mythology resonates with stories, including the golden apples of Atlanta and Melanion. And one of the 12 tasks of Hercules was to steal apples from Hesperides' garden. Now, hands up those of us who haven't been scrumping at one time or other. And then there was apple ducking, as we used to call it, at Halloween. And that was the wonderful game where you floated apples in a bowl of water, put your hands behind your back, and then you had to lean down and bite the apple. Or the apple could be hanging for a string and the same thing prevailed. But there's a lovely bit of Celtic folklore attached to that. If you managed to bite the apple at first go, then your marriage was going to be fine, perfect, and it would blossom perfectly. If you managed to bite the apple at second go, well, your marriage would take place, but it may not be that happy. Third go, or afterwards, then look out, it was going to be an absolute disaster. But what I find really fascinating are the traditions and folklore associated with apples. And I'm hoping to meet someone who knows so much about that subject. I'm just interested, Andrew, about some of the folklore associated with apples.
Well, there's a whole range of folklore associated with apples going back a very, very long time, and you know, in the pagan and the Druid traditions, the apple has a significance of being like a gift or a blessing and bounty from nature, you know, and from the goddess particularly. And if you get an apple and you cut it in half, or cut it crossways, you find you have a pentagram inside. So there's a symbol of a pentagram, and this is linked, you know, scientifically. Yeah. It's one of the rosaceous trees, so it's got 5 petals, and that transfers into the fruit. In the folklore of Glastonbury, for example, that's the island of apples and the island of youth in the old Celtic Druid tradition. a form of heaven, I suppose, or an island of the other world, and it's always located somewhere in the west, off the coast. People were always trying to reach it, and people could reach it in their dreams or at certain times of the year, or in poetry and song, in the old tradition.
That's fantastic. Now, what about the story I've heard about beating or shaking the trees to get the spirits, the evil spirits?
Yes. Well, no. I mean, when we have the wassail, mostly a Saxon tradition. From the wassail is a Saxon word, but we also find its equivalent in Wales, and was really beating the bounds of the orchard, and it's to bless the trees and to bring good health to the trees and ensure a good harvest. But in the West Country, wherever I come from originally, they have the tradition of beating the trees to get the apples out of the trees, the last apples, because cider apples are usually the latest apples to come off the tree. And we think, well, why are they beating the trees? It's a harsh treatment for the trees, but it's actually a form of pruning. So scientifically, it breaks some branches, or it mashes the tips, and it regenerates the tree, and the tree being challenged bodily like that starts to sprout more spur growth, and it's the spur growth that's the fruiting spurs on the trees. So
isn't it fascinating the way that science and folklore interlocks and overlaps?
Yes, they do. They move in and out sometimes. They don't always coincide completely, but they do coincide at certain important points, I think.
And if you want proof of how important orchards are in Wales, you only have to look at the place name Berllan. And so not only do we have the Welsh term for orchards, but we also have
Welsh variety, Pren Glass.
So what's the history behind these, Andrew?
Well, they're a very old Welsh variety, and I think they're from a monastery near St Dogmiles.
And then thinking about place names in the shadows of the past, well, there's the legendary King Arthur. And where did he live? He lived in Avalon. And there may be a nice Welsh connection there, because of course Aval is Welsh for apple. And we only have to look in the laws of Hywel Dda to see the significance of apples and orchards. I've got a little reference here that an apple tree had the equivalent value of 16 lambs or 15 pigs. And of course, orchards during the medieval period were seen as places of rest, repose, but of course of dalliance, romance, fruitfulness, and fecundity. And there's one of our lovely folk songs which speaks so eloquently. Dacw and hariad ilaw ana Berllan. There's my love down in the orchard. Out of interest, I checked online just how many songs that feature apples, and I found absolutely dozens of them, including the very famous one that was released by the Andrews Sisters in 1942, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree. And apples feature in our everyday speech. We're all familiar with an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, that originated in Pembrokeshire in 1866 with the local saying which said, "Eat an apple on going to bed. That'll stop the doctor from earning his bread." And here's folklore and science intertwining again, because there was a study in 2013 which estimated that eating an apple a day was comparable for over 50s for taking a statin drug every day, and without the side effects. So the happy combination of folklore, science, music and culture come together with the growing of apples. And we're here in the delightful hamlet of Cumdi near Llandeilo, where we're celebrating the harvesting of the fruit. So I'm just going to pop in, try some of the cider and make a little music. I'm taking my statin treatment in liquid form. Cheers.
Yeah, I used to work occasionally 4 minutes.